The first question comes from Alex, and he basically asks, "Hey man, how do you program metabolite techniques? You mentioned that you don't really go through full-on metabolite phases, so what's kind of your approach to those?" And great question. So the way that I go about programming metabolite techniques is I more so sprinkle them in across the mesocycle. So I will choose 1 to 3 muscle groups to where I will work in some metabolite techniques on per mesocycle. And then each mesocycle, I'll rotate through the muscle groups. So for mesocycle 1, it might be back and biceps. And I particularly like pairing like back and biceps, like both of the pulling muscle groups, because my thought process is like, if you're doing metabolites for your back, then you're kind of doing metabolites for your biceps as well. So might as well just totally hammer them both in a single mesocycle is kind of my thought process. Now, that doesn't mean my thought process is always correct. And I guarantee you my thought process is not always correct. But that's how I go about it. So meso 1 could be back and bis, meso 2 chest and tris, meso 3 delts and quads. I don't mess around with metabolites for my hamstrings because I'm happy with my growth there, and I think that my hamstrings in particular respond very well to lower rep ranges. Like your boy was a sprinter in high school, and I feel like I might be a little bit more kind of on the faster twitch side of things for those hamstrings. Take me back to making state track in high school. Although our 4x1 team, so it was a relay. We all ran 100 meters, made it to state. Pretty cool. But man, I was definitely the slowest guy on that team, and my team definitely carried it, but I did what I could. Anyways, I think I'm a little faster twitch there, and I just don't mess around with metabolites because I don't think I get much out of them for hamstrings. So that is kind of the general structure over the macro cycle. Now, regarding like reps in reserve on metabolite techniques, I take things pretty close to failure. I think it's a good idea to take metabolite techniques to like at least 1 rep in reserve or pretty dang close, just because if you're doing metabolite techniques, you're probably working with potentially lower loads at some point, like if you're doing a drop set or something like that. And when working with lower loads, it's probably a good idea to train closer to failure. Also, when trying to accumulate those metabolites, we probably need to be a little bit closer to failure to actually get that accumulation. So I think that with your reps in reserve on metabolite techniques, I'd keep things a little closer to failure. Now, he also asked about tracking volume on these. I don't worry about that too much. All right? So the way that I go about it is in weeks 1 and 2 of a mesocycle, I might do 1 drop set after the very final set. So I might program a 3x15 and then plus 1 drop set. So after your 3rd set, do a drop set. And then in week 3 and 4, it might be plus 2 drop sets. So you drop the weight once and then drop it again. And then your volume still might scale for that exercise across the meso. So you might still have 2, then 3, then 4, then 5 traditional sets across the meso, but those drop sets might increase as well. And I don't worry about tracking volume too precisely on the metabolite techniques. I focus on getting a good pump, training hard, and I think that when you're doing metabolite techniques, your focus is on accumulating metabolites and getting a pump. Not necessarily on applying progressive increases in weight on the bar. Like there's definitely a time and place to make sure that you're able to track your weight on the bar and tracking your PRs over time. Of course, that's a good idea. But I don't think metabolite techniques is necessarily the place to get too meticulous on, okay, last week I did this, so this week I have to do this. Nah, man, I think that get in there, get an awesome pump, and don't worry about it so much on those exercises. And then track your PRs elsewhere, and you should be good. All right? And for metabolite techniques, I like using drop sets. I like using same muscle group supersets. So like I might superset a lat pullover with a horizontal row or something like that. And I like giant sets can be good to where maybe you're doing leg press and you're like, okay, I'm going to keep going until I hit 50 on this set. So I might pick a weight that I can do for 20 or so reps or something like that. And then I might take a few breaths, pump out a few more, and then I'll drop the weight, keep on going, get another 10 to 15 reps, and then drop the weight again. And then when I get to 50 reps, I'm done or something like that. That's pretty brutal. The most brutal metabolite technique I've ever done is I did walking lunges supersetted with goblet squats, supersetted with body weight lunges, supersetted with body weight squats. And when you're hitting failure on body weight squats, you know you have effed your shit up. All right, I think that's that question. And I forgot these damn pants in the background. But the next question asks, at a high body fat percentage, okay, so they said they were at a high body fat percentage and they're just 4 weeks into a fat loss phase. They're deloading in week 5. They feel fine and don't really want a diet break. What should they do? All right, so it sounds like their body fat levels are fairly high. They don't necessarily want to take a week off of the diet to deload. What should they do in this situation? I think that this would be my ideal approach here would probably be to diet through the first part of the deload and then take just a couple of days to refeed. All right, so in this situation, I would probably diet through the first half of the deload to where you're still like at least doing something in the gym. Like, yes, your volume is halved, but your reps in reserve aren't like crazy low or anything like that at this point. Well, at least the way I structure deloads, I tend to cut volume in half the whole week. First half of the week, I will go like 3 to 5 RIR. And then the second half of the week, I'll go like 5+ RIR. So I would say that in this situation, diet through your first half of the deload to where things are still kind of hard enough. And then the second half of the deload when your things are super easy for your training and you're not providing much of a stimulus for that muscle to hang around, I would say, hey, take 2 to 3 days to refeed, eat at maintenance, and you're really going to make sure you prevent any muscle loss. And plus, having a few refeed days after 4 or 5 weeks of dieting might not be a bad call either. All right? So that's how I would approach that. Next question asks me, they are weaker after a deload, even after playing with reducing volume, reducing intensity, taking a full week off. What's going on here? So this is something that I see across clients, and it's pretty dang common to come back after a deload and not feel quite right. And what I think is going on is they just kind of maybe detrained a little bit to where you're not quite used to your movements as much anymore, and your maybe neurological gains and stuff like that have potentially decreased and stuff like that, and things just feel kind of off that first week back, and it takes a second to get those motor patterns back in. And I don't think that this is a problem as long as you're still hitting like PRs over the long run, over a few mesocycles. So I don't necessarily think it's anything inherently bad. Now, what I would try, you've tried lowering volume, taking a week off. I would try going the other route with it. And maybe don't deload as much. So maybe instead of cutting volume in half, like half of week 1 on a deload, maybe you just do 3/4 of week 1 volume or something like that. Or maybe you keep volume in half, but not dropping intensity very much. So keeping your reps in reserve to 3 or 4 the entire week, but cut volume in half. See if that helps you maintain strength when you get back. But if you're still hitting PRs and stuff, I wouldn't worry about it too much. But that is what I would play with. Now, if you notice that you're still like fatigued going into your week 1 and stuff like that, and you don't think that the deload is actually fully recovering you, well, then I might say that you're potentially either overreaching a bit too much in your final week of your mesocycle, so maybe tone that down a little bit, back off a little bit, or it could be a good time for like an active rest phase to where maybe it's after several mesocycles of hypertrophy training, and hey, running something like a deload and then a week off might allow you to fully drop fatigue so you're good for your next mesocycle. Or you could do a primer phase or a maintenance phase of a longer term lower volume. But I would probably play around with actually keeping things a little bit more intense in your deload week and seeing how that goes first. And then if you're feeling fatigued, stuff like that still in week 1, then maybe it's time for a little bit longer of a break. All right, so hopefully that helps you out there. Question 4. They got sick in week 4 of a 5-week mesocycle. What do they do? I would say it depends on the extent of how sick you got. Did you just miss a couple of training sessions? If so, cool. I would just push everything back a couple of days. So you're going to finish your mesocycle just a couple of days later. Maybe you shorten your deload by a day or 2 so you get back on your schedule. That would be fine. Option number 2, if you missed like 3 or 4 days or something like that, I wouldn't jump right into overreaching week. I think that would not go very well. You would definitely overdo things. And I would probably actually revert back to week 2 or 3 of your mesocycle. So when volumes aren't quite as high. So if you missed 3 or 4 days, I would go back to week 2 or 3 and ease back into your mesocycle and finish it out. If you miss like the entire week because you're sick, I would probably just say, hey, let's call this mesocycle good. Treat this as a deload, and if you're kind of ready, it helps you drop fatigue, resensitizes you, then hey, start up a new mesocycle next time around. Or you might need another deload week there because fatigue might not drop much while you're sick. So you might need actually another week there and take your medicine and then start a new mesocycle. All right? So that is kind of how I would approach that. Final question. Gaining too fast in the off season, how soon before decreasing calories? Like if they're gaining too fast for a week, do you decrease calories or wait it out longer? And I would probably give it at least 2 or 3 weeks of gaining too fast, because it would be very easy, or something that I see that's weird but very common is I'll have a client, they're gaining maybe on the higher side for 2 or 3 weeks. I'll decrease calories by just 100, and then their weight will plateau for like 3 or 4 weeks straight. And then you kind of get caught in this cycle of increasing calories, but then decreasing them, maintaining, then increasing again, gaining too fast, and it's just not great. So I think that, man, at least very minimum 2 weeks. I would probably lean towards 3 or 4 weeks, just because I've seen it so many times to where, both ways, so many times to where people don't gain anything for a week or even 2 weeks, and then in the third week, they gain 1% of their body weight, and then their monthly average is perfect. And then I also see it go the other way to where they gain 1% of their body weight in their first week of gaining, or just one random week. You hold on, and then things kind of plateau for a couple weeks, and then they jump again. They plateau for a few weeks, jump again. So I would give it at least 2 or 3 weeks before reducing calories or increasing calories during a gaining phase if you're not gaining at the rate you want. So that's all the questions this week. I appreciate you tuning in. It would help me out so much if you would share this on your story, and I'll see you next Sunday.